Sarah stood at the kitchen table, her gaze flicking back and forth between the clock on the wall and the door. Harper should have been home by now. Ballet class had ended nearly an hour ago, and yet there was no sign of her 8-year-old daughter. The house felt unnervingly quiet without the usual burst of energy that followed Harper's return. The unease in Sarah's chest grew tighter with each passing minute. She forced herself to breathe deeply, trying to calm the knot of worry growing inside her. Maybe Lena's mom had an errand to run, she muttered to herself, attempting to explain the delay. Michelle, Lena's mother, had picked up the girls after ballet that day, as Sarah had been stuck in meetings all afternoon. They often took turns picking up Harper and Lena, so this was nothing unusual, but today felt different. It was too quiet. Too still. On the kitchen counter sat Harper's favorite snack, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, perfectly cut into triangles with apple slices arranged on the side. It sat untouched, waiting for her to burst through the door like always. Finally, the door creaked open, and Harper's soft footsteps echoed through the hallway. "What took you so long?" Sarah called, rushing toward her daughter with a mixture of relief and concern. She knelt down, wrapping her arms around Harper, who returned the hug but didn't meet her eyes. "Sorry, Mom," Harper mumbled, her voice quieter than usual. "I stayed back to practice a new routine with the girls. We've got the big performance soon, and I want to get it perfect." Sarah frowned slightly as she pulled back to look at her daughter. "Again? You've been late every day this week, sweetie? There's homework to be done and you need to rest too. Ballet can't take up all your time." Harper shrugged, still avoiding eye contact. "I just wanted to get it right. I've got the main part," she said, but there was something in her voice that didn't sit right with Sarah. She stood, watching Harper with a growing sense of unease. This wasn't like her daughter. Harper was usually excited to tell her about every little detail of her day, especially when it came to ballet. Something was different, but Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on it. "Harper," she said gently, kneeling down again so she could look her daughter in the eye. "You know you can tell me anything, right? No matter what, you can always talk to me." Harper nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the floor. "I know, Mom," she said softly, and without another word, she moved toward the counter where her snack awaited her. Sarah watched her go, the uneasy feeling in her stomach growing stronger. Harper was hiding something, she could sense it. But what could it be? What was her daughter keeping from her? That night, as Harper settled into bed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And when the same thing happened the next day, Harper arriving home late, with the same vague excuse about staying behind to practice, Sarah knew she had to get to the bottom of it. The following evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, her husband, David, walked into the kitchen. He immediately noticed the tension in her posture, the way she moved a little too briskly around the room. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning against the counter, watching her carefully. Sarah paused, setting down the knife she was using to chop vegetables. She sighed deeply before turning to face him. "It's Harper. She's been coming home late from ballet every day this week. At first I thought it was just extra practice, but something doesn't add up. I called the ballet studio earlier today, and Madame Erica said Harper hasn't been staying late at all. The younger kids are dismissed on time because they need their own space after school." David frowned, his eyes narrowing in concern. "So where has she been going?" "That's the problem, I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tight with worry. "I asked Michelle if Harper was going home with Lena, but she said Harper told her that we were picking her up every day. So Michelle just assumed we had it covered. I can't figure out what's going on, but Harper's been lying to us." David ran a hand through his hair, his expression darkening. "That's not like her. We need to find out what's happening. But if we ask her directly, she'll probably clam up. Harper's smart, she'll know we're onto her." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We'll follow her tomorrow, see where she's going after ballet." The next afternoon, they put their plan into action. Sarah and David parked a short distance from the ballet studio, keeping a careful watch from the car. They sipped their coffees in tense silence, waiting for Harper's class to end. When the doors of the ballet studio finally opened, Harper emerged, but instead of heading toward Michelle's car or the bus stop, she walked in the opposite direction, her steps quick and deliberate. "Where is she going?" David muttered, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he watched their daughter move further away from the familiar streets. They followed at a distance, making sure not to be seen. Harper moved with a strange sense of purpose, weaving through side streets and alleyways. The further they went, the more run down the neighborhood became. Graffiti-covered walls, broken windows, and abandoned buildings replaced the cozy suburban streets they were used to. Finally, Harper stopped in front of an old, dilapidated factory. The building loomed over her, its windows shattered and its walls crumbling with neglect. Sarah's heart lurched in her chest. "This can't be right," she whispered, glancing at David. "Why would she come here?" David shook his head, his jaw clenched. "I don't know, but we need to be careful. This place looks dangerous." They parked the car a short distance away and crept toward the factory, keeping out of sight. Harper disappeared inside through a rusted side door, and Sarah felt her stomach twist in knots. As they approached the entrance, they could hear Harper's voice echoing faintly from within the building. They crept closer, staying hidden in the shadows of the decaying structure. "I told my parents I was practicing," Harper's voice echoed through the empty space. "They have no idea I'm here with you, Angela." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who was Angela? Why was Harper meeting someone in a place like this? They peeked around a corner, and what they saw made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Harper was kneeling beside an elderly woman who looked frail and disheveled, her clothes dirty and torn. The woman sat huddled on the cold, cracked floor, her hands trembling as Harper handed her a lunch bag. "I brought you some food, just like I promised," Harper said softly, her voice filled with kindness. The elderly woman smiled weakly, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "You're such a good girl, Harper. Thank you." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she watched the scene unfold. Her daughter, her sweet, compassionate little girl, had been sneaking away every day to help this woman. But as Sarah took a closer look at the woman's face, a wave of recognition washed over her, followed by a surge of anger. It was Angela. Angela had once been the caregiver hired to help Sarah's mother during her final months. But Angela had betrayed their family, stealing from Sarah's mother when she was at her most vulnerable. She had taken nearly everything: money, jewelry, and valuables, leaving Sarah's mother penniless in her final days. The betrayal had cut deep, and Sarah had never forgiven her. Rage flared in Sarah's chest, replacing the pride she'd felt only moments ago. She couldn't believe that Harper had been helping the very woman who had caused so much pain in their lives. "Harper," Sarah called out sharply, stepping out of the shadows. Her voice was laced with anger and hurt. "Come here. Now." Harper looked up, her eyes widening in shock as she saw her parents standing there. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" David stepped forward, his face tight with barely controlled anger. "We should be asking you that, Harper. What are you doing here? Why didn't you tell us about this?" Harper's lower lip trembled as she looked down at the floor, avoiding their gazes. "I didn't want you to be mad," she whispered. She was all alone, and she looked so hungry. "I met her outside the ballet studio a few weeks ago. Madame Erica chased her away, but I followed her. She didn't have anywhere to go, so I brought her food." Sarah's heart ached as she listened to her daughter's explanation, but the anger still burned hot within her. "Harper, do you even know who this woman is?" Harper shook her head slowly. Sarah's voice shook as she spoke. "This woman stole from your grandmother. She took everything: money, valuables, and left her with nothing. Your grandmother couldn't afford her medication because of her. This is the woman who hurt our family." Harper looked up at Angela with wide, confused eyes. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Angela, who had been silent until now, bowed her head in shame. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's true. I did a terrible thing. I stole from your grandmother because I was desperate. My daughter was dying and I needed money for her surgery. But by the time I had the money, it was too late. She passed away. After that, I lost everything: my home, my family. I've been living on the streets ever since." The air between them grew heavy with the weight of her confession. Sarah's emotions churned within her: anger, betrayal, sorrow. She had spent years harboring hatred for this woman, and now she was standing in front of her, broken and repentant. David stepped forward, his voice gentler now. "Why didn't you try to make things right?" Angela wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was too ashamed. I couldn't face you after what I'd done. I thought about reaching out so many times, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Sarah crossed her arms tightly over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. She had dreamed of confronting Angela, of making her pay for the pain she had caused. But now that she was here, standing in front of this broken woman, it wasn't as satisfying as she'd imagined. Mom, Harper's voice broke through the silence, small and trembling. "What are you going to do?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, seeing the conflict in her young eyes. Harper didn't fully understand the history, but her instinct to help was strong, untainted by the bitterness of the past. David placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, his voice soft. "We can't let anger control this." Sarah blinked back the tears that had formed in her eyes. She knew he was right. She could feel it deep down, even though every part of her wanted to lash out. Slowly, she exhaled. "Come with us," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "We'll take you to a shelter where they can help you get back on your feet." Angela looked up in disbelief, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Harper stepped forward, taking Angela's hand. "Come on," she said, her voice gentle and full of compassion. As they walked out of the factory and into the cool evening air, Sarah couldn't help but feel a weight lifting from her chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step towards something better. Maybe, just maybe, Harper's pure heart had led them to something greater than the pain they'd carried for so long. Over the following weeks, Sarah, David, and Harper visited Angela at the shelter. The visits were awkward at first, but over time they grew more comfortable. Angela found a job as a lunch lady at Harper's school, and slowly she began to rebuild her life. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a start. For Sarah, the journey to forgiveness was slow, but every time she saw the way Harper looked at Angela with kindness and understanding, she knew they were on the right path. Harper had reminded her that compassion, even in the face of hurt, could lead to healing. And that, Sarah realized, was the greatest lesson of all.